Maya hit the mat hard, the echo of Coach Rex's shove louder than the slap of her fall. Every student froze as her tears betrayed her pain and the coach's cruelty. From the shadows, a quiet figure rose, calm, composed, and watching no longer. Welcome to Chuck Norris Heroics. Let's uncover what really happened. The fluorescent lights of the ironclad martial arts academy hummed with a monotonous drone, casting a sterile white glare upon the polished wooden floor. Sweat, old and new, mingled with the faint, sharp scent of disinfectant, creating an atmosphere thick with exertion and unspoken anxieties. Young figures in stark white uniforms moved across the mats, their bare feet whispering against the wood, a rhythmic counterpoint to the sharp, percussive shouts of ki that punctuated their movements. At the periphery of this disciplined chaos, Maya, a girl of 13, adjusted the simple cotton belt around her waist. It was a plain white, signifying her novice status. Yet her movements, when she practiced, possessed a quiet grace, a focus that seemed at odds with her beginner rank. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, revealing a face etched with a seriousness that belied her youth. She wasn't the strongest, nor the fastest, but there was an intensity in her dark eyes, a meticulous attention to each stance, each block, each preparatory breath that set her apart. She wasn't here for glory, nor for the gleaming trophies that lined one wall of the dojo, silent testaments to past victories. She was here for the art itself, for the sense of order and control it offered, a stark contrast to the sometimes turbulent currents of her young life. Overseeing the class was Coach Rex, a man whose physical presence was as imposing as his reputation. Tall and heavily muscled, his black belt cinched tight around a formidable frame. He paced the edge of the mats like a caged predator. His voice, a gravelly baritone, barked commands that brooked no hesitation, no imperfection. To Coach Rex, martial arts were a crucible designed to burn away weakness, to forge warriors. Compassion, in his view, was a liability, tears, an unforgivable sin. His philosophy was etched into the taut expressions of his students. In a way, they flinched almost imperceptibly when his gaze fell upon them. Further back, almost swallowed by the deepening shadows near the entrance where street shoes were neatly lined, an older man sat on a worn wooden bench. He was an infrequent visitor, sometimes seen observing quietly, never speaking, never interfering. He wore simple, unassuming clothes, a faded work shirt, durable trousers. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, his face lined with the quiet wisdom of years. His hands, when they weren't resting calmly in his lap, possessed a stillness that spoke of immense, contained power. Few, if any of the students, or even Coach Rex, knew his name, or if they did, they attached no particular significance. He was just another parent, perhaps, or a relative waiting patiently. This was Chuck Norris, finding a moment of quiet observation, a habit ingrained from a lifetime of understanding that the truest insights often came not from participation, but from watching the unvarnished interactions of others. He wasn't scrutinizing technique. He was reading the undercurrents, the subtle dynamics of power and fear that pulsed beneath the surface of the disciplined drills. Today, the training was particularly grueling. Coach Rex was pushing them through a relentless series of sparring drills, pairing students with little regard for weight or experience. Maya found herself partnered with a boy significantly larger and more aggressive, his movements fueled by a desire to impress their formidable instructor. She parried and blocked, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, her smaller frame absorbing impacts that sent jolts through her bones. She stumbled once, her ankle twisting slightly, a sharp pain lancing up her leg. She bit her lip, forcing herself back in a stance, her eyes watering not just from the physical shock, but from the sheer, overwhelming pressure to endure, to not show the pain, to not be the weakness Coach Rex so openly despised. The relentless barrage from her larger opponent continued, each block strike sending a jarring thrum through Maya's already aching arms. The twisted ankle throbbed with a persistent, fiery pain, making her movements less steady, her balance precarious. She could feel the sting of unshed tears pricking at the back of her eyes, a traitorous heat rising in her cheeks. She fought it back, swallowing hard, her jaw clenched with the effort of suppression. But then, a particularly forceful side kick, one she hadn't anticipated, caught her on the ribs. The air whooshed from her lungs in a silent gasp. and the impact sent her sprawling onto the hard mat. The pain was a white-hot explosion, stealing her breath, and with it, her carefully constructed composure. A single tear escaped, then another, tracing hot paths down her dust-streaked cheek as she lay there, winded and overwhelmed. Coach Rex, who missed nothing, saw it instantly. His pacing stopped. His eyes, cold and hard as chips of granite, narrowed. "Tears, Collins," he boomed, his voice slicing through the low hum of exertion in the dojo. "Are those tears I see?" Maya pushed herself up, her movements stiff, her face burning with humiliation. She hastily wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, but it was too late. The evidence of her weakness was undeniable. "There's no crying in my dojo," Rex continued, his voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of every student. The drills around them faltered, then ceased altogether. All eyes turned towards Maya, some with a flicker of pity, most with a carefully neutral fear, knowing what was likely to come. "Crying is for the weak, for those who don't belong here. This is a place for warriors, not for crybabies." His contempt was a palpable force, pressing down on Maya, making her feel small, exposed. He strode towards her, his heavy footsteps thudding ominously on the mat. "You think you could just break down when things get a little tough? You think that's how you earn respect? That's how you achieve anything?" He loomed over her, a mountain of muscle and disdain. "Perhaps you need a more direct lesson in what it means to be strong." He gestured dismissively. "Get up. You're not done." Maya, trembling but resolute, slowly got to her feet. Her ribs ached. Her ankles screamed in protest, but the fear of further humiliation of his escalating anger was a more potent goad. "You," Rex snarled, his face inches from hers, "are going to spar with me right now. We'll see how many tears you have left when a real opponent pushes you." Before Maya could even process the command, before she could even form a word of protest or plea, his hand shot out, not in a strike, but in a rough, contemptuous shove to her shoulder. It wasn't a martial arts move. It was a bully's assertion of dominance. The unexpected force sent Maya, already unsteady, stumbling backwards. Her injured ankle gave way completely, and she cried out, a small, involuntary sound of pain as she crashed to the ground again, landing hard on her hip. The dojo was utterly silent save for Maya's hitched breath. The students stared, frozen. This was beyond the usual harshness. This was a line crossed. From the shadowy corner, Chuck Norris's posture, which had been relaxed, became very still. His eyes, which had been calmly observing, now held a focused intensity, like a lens sharpening on a single, critical point. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed louder, the air colder. The coach had just made a grievous error, and in the quiet stillness of the observer, a decision was beginning to form. Chuck Norris watched the scene unfold with a deep, resonant stillness, the kind that precedes a storm. His decades of experience, not just in martial arts, but in observing human nature under pressure, allowed him to see beyond the surface theatrics. He saw Coach Rex's actions not as a misguided attempt at toughening a student, but as a blatant abuse of power, a manifestation of an ego that fed on fear and intimidation. The push, the girl's cry of pain, the shocked silence of the other children. It all painted a clear, undeniable picture of tyranny in a space that should have been dedicated to discipline, respect, and growth. He remembered his own early instructors, men of profound skill and even profounder humility, who taught that true strength was found in control, compassion, and the protection of the vulnerable, not in their degradation. What he was witnessing was a perversion of those principles, a betrayal of the very spirit of martial arts. Maya, meanwhile, lay on the mat for a long moment, the sharp pain in her hip and ankle momentarily eclipsing the burning sting of humiliation. Tears welled anew, but she fought them back with a ferocity born of sheer willpower. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break completely. Slowly, wincing with each movement, she pushed herself into a sitting position. Then, using the uninjured leg, she levered herself up, her body trembling with the effort and suppressed emotion. Her face was pale, streaked with dust and tears she hadn't managed to entirely contain, but her eyes, when she finally lifted them, held a spark of defiance, a refusal to be utterly cowed. Coach Rex watched her struggle with a cold, appraising look. "Still with us, Collins?" he sneered, though perhaps a flicker of something, surprise at her resilience, or a dawning, quickly suppressed awareness that he might have gone too far, briefly crossed his features. Perhaps you're not entirely useless after all. Go sit by the wall. Contemplate your weakness. The rest of you back to drills. And let this be a lesson. I will not tolerate softness in this academy. The students, jolted back in emotion by his command, resumed their training, but the energy was gone. Their movements were mechanical, their faces grim. The earlier vibrancy of the class had been extinguished, replaced by a heavy, oppressive atmosphere of fear and resentment. Maya limped towards the designated wall, each step a painful reminder of the coach's cruelty. She sank down onto the cool wood, her back against the unyielding surface, and drew her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them as if to hold herself together. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sounds of the dojo, the coach's barking commands, the thud of feet, fists. Inside, a storm of emotions raged: pain, anger, shame, and a profound sense of injustice. Why? Why did he have to be so cruel? What had she done to deserve such treatment? Was she truly weak because she cried when hurt? The question swirled, offering no comfort. In a shadowy corner, Chuck Norris remained seated, but his observation had shifted. He was no longer passive. He was now a silent arbiter, the weight of his judgment beginning to gather. He saw Maya's quiet suffering, the fear in the eyes of the other students, the coach's unrepentant arrogance. He knew that silence in the face of such injustice was a form of complicity. The question was no longer if he should intervene, but how and when. He preferred to allow individuals the chance to correct their own mistakes, to find their own moral compass. But Coach Rex had demonstrated a profound lack of. The time for passive observation was rapidly drawing to a close. Coach Rex, seemingly oblivious to the chilling effect his actions had on the class, or perhaps reveling in the renewed sense of fear-induced obedience, continued to push the remaining students with even greater ferocity. He moved among them like a shark, his critiques sharper, his corrections more forceful. He seemed determined to reassert his dominance, to erase any doubt about who was in control. Harder, faster, he bellowed at a pair of boys engaged in a sparring drill. You call that a block? My grandmother hits harder than that. Do it again. He grabbed one of the boys by the arm, roughly repositioning him, his grip unnecessarily tight. The boy winced but said nothing, his eyes downcast. Chuck Norris watched this display with a grim countenance. The coach's behavior was not just an isolated outburst directed at Maya. It was a pattern, a deeply ingrained method of instruction built on intimidation, fear. This wasn't teaching. It was conditioning students to accept abuse as a norm, to equate brutality with strength. He thought of the countless dojos he had visited over the years, places where instructors nurtured talent with patience, where discipline was instilled through respect, not fear, and where the development of character was held in as high regard as physical prowess. This place, under Coach Rex's reign, was a betrayal of those ideals. His gaze drifted to Maya, still huddled against the wall. Her shoulders were shaking almost imperceptibly. She wasn't just physically hurt. Her spirit was being wounded, her nascent love for the art potentially being crushed by the very person who should have been fostered. He saw in her not weakness, but a quiet resilience, a refusal to be entirely broken. And in that, he saw a spark that deserved to be protected, to be fanned, not extinguished. The decision crystallized within him. The line had been crossed too far, the damage too blatant. He could no longer remain a silent observer. The principles he had lived by, the very essence of the martial arts he had dedicated his life to, demanded action. It wasn't about vengeance, nor was it about a public display. It was about restoring balance, about defending the vulnerable, and about demonstrating, in no uncertain terms, what true strength and true leadership looked like. He slowly, deliberately placed his hands on his knees, preparing to rise. The movement was almost imperceptible, yet it carried the weight of an unshakable resolve. He would not allow this perversion of martial arts to continue unchallenged, not on his watch. The moment had come not for a dramatic entrance, but for a quiet, firm, and undeniable intervention. The coach, in his arrogance, had sown the wind. He was about to reap the whirlwind, not of fury, but of a calm, righteous, and deeply formidable justice. The other students continued their drills, their movements lacking spirit, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and a dawning, unspoken resentment. The air in the dojo was thick with a tension that was almost unbearable. Maya tried to control her breathing, focused on a crack in the wooden floor, a tiny imperfection in the otherwise polished surface, using it as an anchor in the storm of her emotions. She didn't know that her silent suffering was about to find an unexpected and profoundly powerful advocate. As Coach Rex was mid-sentence, loudly berating a young girl for a perceived flaw in her stance. Your guard is sloppy, inviting an attack. Do you want to get hurt out there? Is that what you want? A subtle shift occurred at the back of the dojo. The quiet observer, the man who had been a fixture in the shadows, rose from the wooden bench. His movement was unhurried, almost graceful, yet it possessed an undeniable gravity. Chuck Norris straightened to his full height, and though he made no sound, his mere act of standing seemed to draw the ambient energy of the room toward. He took a step, then another, moving from the dimness of the entrance area towards the periphery of the matted training. He didn't stride. He simply walked with a calm, deliberate pace that spoke of purpose. The students closest to him noticed first. Their drills faltered, their eyes, wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, fixed on this unexpected figure. The ripple of their distraction spread outwards, until even Coach Rex, sensing the sudden lull, the break in the rhythm of training, turned, his tirade cut short. What is it now? He snapped, his irritation clear. His gaze fell upon Chuck, who had stopped just at the edge of the mats, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his expression calm, observant, yet holding an undercurrent of something unyielding. Can I help you? Rex asked, his tone laced with impatience and a hint of condescension, clearly dismissing Chuck as an overzealous parent or a curious onlooker who had overstepped his bounds. This is a closed training session. Chuck met Rex's gaze directly. I believe I can, he replied, his voice quiet, yet it carried effortlessly across the suddenly silent dojo. It was not a loud voice, but it possessed a timbre, a resonance that commanded attention. Maya, hearing the new voice, lifted her head. Through her tear-blurred vision, she saw the silhouette of the man who had sometimes watched from the back. She didn't know who he was, but there was something in his stance and the way he held himself that was different, that felt safe. The other students were now openly staring, their training completely forgotten. The usual sounds of the dojo, the thud of feet, the hiss of exhaled breaths, the sharp cries, had ceased, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. Coach Rex's annoyance began to curdle into suspicion. He straightened up, puffing out his chest slightly, a subconscious assertion of his authority. "And who might you be?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he tried to size up this unexpected interruption. "My name is not important right now," Chuck said, his gaze unwavering. "What is important is what I just witnessed here." His eyes flicked briefly towards Maya, then back to Rex. What I saw was not instruction. It was bullying. The word hung in the air, stark and accusatory. Coach Rex's face darkened. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The initial power dynamic of the room, so firmly under his control just moments before, was beginning to tilt, subtly but undeniably, on the axis of this quiet man's presence. The accusation, bullying, struck Coach Rex like a physical blow. His face, already flushed from exertion and his earlier outburst, deepened to a mottled crimson. A vein throbbed visibly at his temple. "Bullying," he scoffed, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I am teaching discipline. I am forging strength. This is how champions are made, not by coddling them, not by wiping their tears every time they stumble." He took a step towards Chuck, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate, a tactic that had always worked with his students. "You clearly know nothing about martial arts, old man, or what it takes to succeed in a competitive world." Chuck remained perfectly still, his calm a stark contrast to Rex's rising agitation. "I know that true discipline comes from within, fostered by respect, not fear," he stated, his voice even and measured. "And I know that strength isn't about how loudly you shout or how hard you can push someone smaller than you. It's about control, about honor, about protecting those who look to you for guidance, not preying on their vulnerabilities." His words were not an attack, but a clear, unwavering statement of principle, and they seemed to chip away at Rex's bluster. "Who are you to lecture me?" Rex spat, his fists clenching at his sides. "I've built this academy from the ground up. My students win championships. What have you ever accomplished? He gestured dismissively at Chuck's unassuming attire. Chuck's gaze swept slowly over the faces of the students, who were watching the exchange with rapt attention. Their earlier fear now mingled with a dawning sense of awe and perhaps a flicker of hope. He saw the bruises, not just the physical ones, but the invisible ones, the ones etched into their expressions by Rex's harsh regime. Accomplishments, Chuck said, his voice tinged with a profound weariness, mean little if they are built on a foundation of broken spirits. He then looked directly at Rex, his eyes, though calm, holding a depth of experience and an unshakable conviction that Rex could not meet. You asked what it takes to succeed. It takes more than just winning. It takes character. It takes integrity. Qualities I have not seen displayed here today. Rex's chest heaved. He was accustomed to unquestioning obedience, to his word being law. This quiet, articulate challenge from an apparent nobody was infuriating, undermining his authority in front of his entire class. You don't like my methods? Then you're welcome to leave, he snarled. This is my dojo, and I run it my way. Perhaps your way, Chuck countered softly, is not the only way. Perhaps it's not even the right way. He paused, then added, with a touch of steel in his voice, especially when your way involves physically and verbally abusing a child. The students gasped collectively. The directness of the accusation, the use of the word abusing, left no room for misinterpretation. Maya, still sitting by the wall, watched with wide, tear-filled eyes. Someone was standing up for her, speaking the truth she had felt but couldn't articulate. Coach Rex's face contorted with rage. Get out, he roared. Get out of my dojo before I throw you out. He took another menacing step forward, clearly intending to escalate the confrontation from verbal to physical. This, Chuck sensed, was the inevitable path for a man like Rex. A man whose authority was built not on respect, but on the threat of force. The raw fury in Coach Rex's voice, his explicit threat, and his aggressive advance signaled a definitive shift. He was no longer attempting to reason or intimidate with words. He was resorting to the only language he truly understood when his dominance was challenged, the threat of physical violence. He clearly underestimated the quiet man before him, seeing only age and an unassuming demeanor, not the decades of discipline and honed skill that lay beneath. Chuck Norris didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He stood his ground, a bastion of calm in the face of Rex's escalating rage. Throw me out, Chuck repeated, his voice still quiet. Yet there was an edge to it now, a subtle warning that a discerning ear might have caught. Is that how you resolve disagreements here, Coach? With force, rather than reason. Rex, however, was beyond reason. His ego was bruised, his authority openly questioned in front of Ophi's entire class. He saw Chuck's calm as mockery, his quiet words as a deliberate undermining of everything he had built. You've got a lot of nerve, old man, coming in here, telling me how to run my business, how to train my students. He seethed, his body tensing, his weight shifting into a more combative stance. You want to see force? I'll show you force. He flexed his hands, his knuckles cracking, a clear, aggressive signal. The students, who had been watching with a mixture of fear and fascination, instinctively took a step back, creating a wider circle around the two men. The air crackled with tension. Maya watched, her heart pounding in her chest, a new kind of fear gripping her, not for herself this time, but for the stranger who had so bravely stepped forward to defend her. Coach Rex was big, strong, and known for his aggressive sparring style. This quiet man, though possessing an undeniable presence, seemed physically no match for. I'm giving you one last chance to walk away, Rex growled, his eyes narrowed into slits. Don't make me regret showing you the door. Chuck's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes, if possible, grew even more focused. He wasn't looking at Rex with anger, but with a profound, almost clinical assessment. Regret, Chuck said softly, is a powerful teacher, Coach. Perhaps today, you'll be the one to learn from it. This final, almost philosophical statement seemed to snap the last vestiges of Rex's control. With a roar of frustration and rage, he lunged. He didn't bother with technique, with form. It was a raw, aggressive charge, his right fist swinging in a wide, powerful haymaker aimed at Chuck's head. The students gasped. Maya covered her mouth, her eyes squeezed shut for a fraction of a second, unable to watch. The attack was fast, brutal, and fueled by unrestrained anger. It was the kind of blow that could do serious damage, but it was also telegraphed, lacking the precision and control that defined true martial skill. For Coach Rex, this was it, the moment to reassert his dominance, to crush this unexpected challenger and restore fear and therefore order to his dojo. He was about to discover, however, that he had profoundly misjudged his opponent and the nature of the force he had just unleashed. Coach Rex's wild haymaker sliced through the air where Chuck Norris's head had been mere milliseconds before. Chuck hadn't made a large, dramatic movement. Instead, he'd executed a subtle, almost imperceptible slip, his body angling slightly, his head tilting just enough for the punch to whistle harmlessly past his ear. His movements were economical, fluid, born from an instinct honed over countless hours of training and real-world application. Rex, his momentum carrying him forward, found himself overextended, his balance compromised. Before he could recover or launch a follow-up attack, Chuck moved. It wasn't an attack in the conventional sense, not a strike designed to inflict pain, but a movement of pure, undeniable control. As Rex's arm swung past, Chuck's left hand rose, not to block, but to guide. His fingers made brief, almost gentle contact with Rex's forearm, subtly redirecting its trajectory further. Simultaneously, Chuck's right foot shifted, a small, precise pivot. His right hand then moved, not with force, but with an almost academic precision, to Rex's exposed side, just below the ribs. It wasn't a punch, but an open palm pressure, applied at the exact moment Rex's own forward momentum was at its peak and his core was vulnerable. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Rex, already off balance from his missed punch, felt his body's energy suddenly and inexplicably turned again. The pressure from Chuck's palm, combined with his own unchecked momentum and the slight pivot from Chuck, sent him stumbling. His feet tangled, his arms flailed for a moment as he fought for equilibrium, but it was a losing battle. He crashed heavily to the mat, not from a powerful blow, but from a masterful application of leverage and timing, his own aggression having been turned into the instrument of his downfall. The thud of his body hitting the polished wood echoed in the stunned silence of the dojo. Rex lay there for a moment, dazed, the air knocked from his lungs, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He had expected a brawl, a test of strength. He had not expected to be undone so completely, so effortlessly, by a man who hadn't even appeared to throw a punch. The student stared, mouths agape. Maya, who had opened her eyes just in time to see the coach fall, felt a gasp lodge in her throat. It hadn't been a fight. It had been a demonstration, a lesson in how true mastery transcended brute force. Chuck stood over Rex, not in triumph, not with a sneer of victory, but with the same calm, steady expression he had worn throughout the confrontation. His breathing was even, his posture relaxed. He hadn't even broken a sweat. "Strength, coach," Chuck said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room, "is not about how hard you can fall. It's about whether you have the wisdom to understand why you fell." He waited a moment, then extended a hand towards the downed coach. It was not an offer of reconciliation, not yet, but a simple gesture, a basic tenet of martial arts etiquette, assisting a fallen opponent. Rex stared at the outstretched hand, then at Chuck's impassive face. Humiliation, rage, and a dawning, unwilling sense of all warred within him. The entire dojo held its collective breath, waiting to see what he would do next. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably overturned. Coach Rex ignored Chuck Norris's extended hand. With a grunt of effort and a face contorted by a mixture of pain and profound humiliation, he scrambled to his feet, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. He glared at Chuck, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with an impotent fury. "That was a lucky shot," he spat, his voice hoarse. "You caught me off guard." Chuck slowly withdrew his hand, his expression unchanging. "There is no luck in a predictable outcome, coach," he replied calmly. "You were off guard the moment you chose arrogance over awareness. The moment you decided intimidation was a substitute for skill." Rex's fists clenched and unclenched. He looked around at his students. Their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and something new, a dawning disillusionment with the man they had once unquestioningly revered. He saw their wide eyes, their silent judgment, and his humiliation deepened. He had been effortlessly defeated, not by a brutal exchange of blows, but by a quiet, almost academic display of superior control in front of everyone. "This is my dojo," Rex reiterated, his voice cracking slightly, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of his shattered authority. "I demand respect." "Respect, coach," Chuck said, his voice still even, "is earned through character, not demanded through fear. It is given to those who show it. You showed none to that young girl." He gestured towards Maya, who was watching with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Nor to any of these students who trust you with their training and their well-being." He then addressed the students directly, his gaze sweeping over their young, impressionable faces. "True martial arts," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet power, "is not about learning how to fight. It's about learning how not to fight. It's about discipline, yes, but it's the discipline of self-control, of humility, of compassion. It's about building a strong spirit, not just a strong body. It's about protecting the weak, not preying on them. What you witnessed here from your coach," he paused, letting his words sink in, "was none of those things." The students listened intently, their expressions thoughtful. For many, it was the first time they had heard such principles articulated so clearly, so powerful. Their training under Coach Rex had been about aggression, about winning at all costs, about suppressing any sign of weakness. Chuck's words offered a different path, a different understanding of what it meant to be a martial artist. Maya felt a sense of validation wash over her. The shame she had felt for crying, for being pushed, began to recede, replaced by a quiet understanding that her reaction had been human and the coach's actions had been wrong. The stranger's words were a balm to her wounded spirit. Coach Rex, seeing the impact of Chuck's words on his students, felt his control slipping away completely. He was no longer the feared leader. He was a defeated bully, his methods exposed, his authority dismantled. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another rebuttal, another excuse, but no words came. What could he say? His actions, and Chuck's effortless counter, had spoken far more eloquently than any words he could now muster. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his earlier arrogance extinguished, leaving behind only the bitter ashes of his pride. The quiet observer from the shadows had, in a few short minutes, irrevocably altered the landscape of the ironclad martial arts academy. The silence in the dojo was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city outside and the soft, almost imperceptible breathing of the assembled students. Coach Rex stood isolated, his earlier bluster gone, replaced by a sullen, defeated air. He looked around at the faces of his students, searching perhaps for a flicker of loyalty, a sign of support, but found only varying degrees of shock, disillusionment, and a dawning understanding. Many avoided his gaze altogether. Chuck Norris let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of the moment, the impact of his words and actions, to settle upon everyone present. He had no desire to further humiliate Rex. His purpose had been to stop an injustice and to impart a crucial lesson. A true instructor, Chuck continued, his voice calm but firm, addressing both Rex and the students, builds their students up. They don't tear them down. They teach them to find strength in their spirit, not just in their fists. They lead by example, with integrity and respect. He looked at Maya, who was now sitting up straighter. Her eyes, though still holding a hint of tears, were no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet contemplation. Crying when you are hurt or overwhelmed is not a sign of weakness, Chuck said, his gaze gentle as he addressed her, and by extension, all the students. It's a sign of being human. True weakness lies in the inability to feel empathy, in the choice to inflict pain on others to make oneself feel powerful. Several students nodded subtly, their expressions reflecting a newfound understanding. They had all experienced Coach Rex's harshness, his dismissiveness, his temper. They had all, at some point, felt the sting of his words or the pressure of his unreasonable demands. What they had witnessed today was a paradigm shift, a demonstration that power did not have to equate to brutality, that strength could be quiet, controlled, and compassionate. One of the older students, a teenage boy with a brown belt who had often been a recipient of Rex's sharpest critiques, slowly raised his hand. Coach Rex didn't even seem to notice. Chuck, however, acknowledged him with a slight nod. "Sir," the boy began, his voice hesitant but clear, What should we do now? About our training." It was a question that hung in the air, reflecting the uncertainty and the sudden vacuum of leadership. Chuck considered the question for a moment. "That," he said, "is a decision you all, and the people responsible for this academy will have to make. But I would suggest you seek out instructors who embody the true spirit of martial arts, those who teach with patience, who inspire with respect, and who understand that the greatest black belt is the one worn around a good heart. He then turned back to Coach Rex, whose face was now a mask of stony resignation. You have a choice to make too, Coach, Chuck said, his tone not accusatory, but offering a path, however difficult. You can continue down this road, or you can reflect on what happened here today and learn from it. True masters are always students first. With those final words, Chuck Norris gave a slight, formal bow towards the students, a gesture of respect that Coach Rex had never offered them. He then turned and walked with the same quiet, deliberate pace he had entered with, back towards the shadowy entrance of the dojo. He didn't look back. His work there was done. The students watched him go, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and deep reflection on their faces. The atmosphere in the ironclad martial arts academy had been irrevocably changed. The ironclad grip of fear had been broken, and in its place, the first fragile seeds of a different kind of strength, a different kind of discipline, had been sown. Maya watched him leave, a profound sense of gratitude welling up inside her. A stranger had seen her pain, had understood her unspoken plea, and had stepped out of the shadows to defend not just her, but a principle. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would never forget this day, nor the quiet, powerful man who had taught her, and everyone else in the dojo, what true honor looked like. The hum of the fluorescent lights no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it seemed to illuminate a path forward, a path towards a better, more respectful way of training, and perhaps of living.